we approach the NBA trade deadline, there are 4 playoff hopeful teams that are likely going to try and remove salary off their books for this season. Playoff teams usually aren't focused on saving money, but for these teams, there's a reason to. Now let's find out who these 4 teams are. The average NBA payroll is $180 million, but the current payroll for our first team, the Golden State Warriors, is more than double that at almost $400 million. That's because on top of over $200 million in player salaries, they're looking at a tax bill of over $185 million. For reference, back in 2010, the Golden State Warriors were sold to Joe Lacob's ownership group for $450 million. That's just $50 million more than they're going to pay for this season's team. And with a payroll like that, most ownership groups are going to have expectations of a championship. And while the Warriors have been title contenders for most of the last decade, it looks like that run is finally coming to an end. The Warriors are currently the 4th worst team in the Western Conference. And now even just earning a play-in spot is starting to feel like a long shot. So as we approach the NBA trade deadline on February the 8th, Golden State may have to make moves with their balance sheet in mind over the product on the court. This season, the Warriors currently have 4 players playing at a sub-all-star level, earning between $22 and $43 million. Draymond Green is earning $22.3 million with a total of 4 years and $100 million remaining on his contract. Andrew Wiggins is earning $24.3 million this season with a total of 4 years and $109 million remaining. Chris Paul is essentially on a $30.8 million expiring deal since he has no guaranteed money after this season. And Klay Thompson is also on a $43.2 million expiring deal. Just to put things into perspective, if the Warriors could make a trade and shave $20 million off their payroll, just their tax bill alone would reduce by $113 million. And Golden State won't be the only team motivated to cut salary at this year's trade deadline. Now, before I go into the other teams on the list, I'm going to quickly explain a few key factors about how the tax system works in the NBA. Number 1, the tax system in the NBA has an increasingly punitive structure. And if a team is over the tax in 4 of the last 5 seasons, that team is subject to what's called the repeater tax, which results in much harsher tax rates. The following teams would be repeater teams this season if they finish over the tax line: the Golden State Warriors, the Los Angeles Clippers, the Milwaukee Bucks, and the Los Angeles Lakers. Here's an example to illustrate the impact of the repeater tax. The Milwaukee Bucks are $18 million over the tax. Their tax bill would have been $39 million if they weren't a repeater. But since they are, their tax bill is going to be 49% higher than it would have been, and now sits at almost $58 million. The second thing to know about the tax system is that teams are actually incentivized to stay below the tax. They not only save on money owed, but they also actually receive a payout. That's because 50% of all the taxes paid by teams that finish over the tax are put into a tax distribution fund and evenly shared amongst all the teams that finish under the tax line. And the third most important point to understand about the NBA financial structure is that if a team is so much above that tax line that they actually also end up over the first or second apron, in addition to facing financial penalties, as a result of the recent CBA, they're now also going to face roster building restrictions, like not being able to sign certain buyout players, harsher rules around making trades, and in future seasons, these penalties get even worse and include certain things like frozen draft picks. And for these reasons, most teams won't plan on being over the apron for more than 1 season. Now, here's a list of the full 9 teams that are currently over the luxury tax line right now. We have the Golden State Warriors that are $41.7 million over the tax, the Los Angeles Clippers that are $34.7 million over, the Phoenix Suns at $21.5 million over, the Milwaukee Bucks at $18.3 million over, the Boston Celtics at $18.2 million over, the Denver Nuggets at $12.6 million over, the Miami Heat at $8.7 million over, the Philadelphia 76ers at $4.3 million, and the Los Angeles Lakers at $1.3 million over. Now, the second team on our list of playoff hopeful teams that could be looking to shave salary at this year's trade deadline are the Philadelphia 76ers. Philadelphia is currently only $4.3 million over the tax line. And with Embiid's recent meniscus injury news, they may decide not to push in all their chips this season. What's also interesting about the Philadelphia 76ers situation is that if they don't get under the tax this season and then go over the tax again next season, they'd become a repeater tax team subject to those repeater tax rates. But to avoid all that, all they have to do is cut their current payroll by $4.3 million. Doing that would save them about $6.4 million in taxes owed, plus earn them about $12 million from the tax distribution fund, and keep them out of that repeater tax for the next 3 seasons. You see, since the rule is that you have to be over the tax in 4 of the past 5 seasons, if you avoid being a tax team for 2 years in a row, you essentially reset the clock, and it would take a full 4 years before you could mathematically become a repeater tax team again. Now, in addition to getting under the tax, Philly's also going to try to maintain cap space for this offseason. So if they do decide to make a trade, they likely won't want to take back a player with any guaranteed money beyond this season. But there's a reality where Philadelphia could actually make a trade to acquire a player that could help them with this season's playoff run, get them under the tax for this season, and avoid all repeater tax concerns for the next 3 seasons, and simultaneously keep their 2024 cap space wide open. Here's an example of a trade that could achieve all of that. If the Philadelphia 76ers target a player like Bruce Brown Jr. from the Toronto Raptors, who's currently making $22 million, they could send out a combination of Marcus Morris and Robert Covington, who make a combined $28.8 million. They combine that with some draft picks. A trade like this would keep both teams around $2 million below that tax line, and Philadelphia would net around $18 million positive from this trade between the savings on their tax bill and the tax distribution that they would receive. It just comes down to if Philadelphia is willing to give up the draft capital it would take to acquire a player like Bruce Brown, and with Joel Embiid's health up in the air, they may be reluctant. The third team to keep an eye on are the Los Angeles Lakers. If the Lakers' salary finishes where it currently is, this would be the 4th season in a row that the Lakers would finish above that tax line, making them a repeater tax team. And looking ahead, even if the Lakers did get under the tax this season, if they went over the tax again next season, that would still be 4 of the past 5 seasons that they would finish over the tax. So they'd still be a repeater tax team in 2025, regardless of what they do this season. But the reason that the Lakers should look at trying to cut salary to duck the tax for this season is because they're so close to it that improving their roster and simultaneously getting below the tax isn't that difficult. See, the Lakers are only about $1.3 million over the tax line. And if they can reduce just that small amount in salary, they're going to net out about $15 million positive between the tax savings and the money that they would receive from the tax distribution fund. So it feels like a bit of a no-brainer. Now, here's an example of a trade that could make that possible. As we know, the Los Angeles Lakers have been rumored to be targeting DeJounte Murray of the Atlanta Hawks. So in this trade package, if the Los Angeles Lakers sent out D'Angelo Russell and Gabe Vincent along with draft capital, they would be sending out $27.8 million in salary. In return, if they received DeJounte Murray and Saddiq Bey, they would be receiving about $26.1 million back in salary. DeJounte Murray's salary also includes his trade bonus, which is around $3.3 million. This trade would net a savings for the Los Angeles Lakers of about $1.7 million. And since the Lakers are only about $1.3 million over the tax, this trade will allow them to finish under that tax line. The 4th playoff hopeful team that could potentially be looking to shave salary at this year's trade deadline is a team that has a history of finding a way to just get under that tax line by the trade deadline. This team also just cut about $6.5 million off their payroll last week and improved their roster at the same time. The team I'm talking about is Miami. You see, Miami was about $15.2 million over the tax just a week ago and are now only $8.7 million over the tax. Still a significant amount, and it won't be easy for them to get under, but it's not impossible. Now, many may think that the Heat were done making trades after that Terry Rozier trade, but they haven't looked great after that trade and are still sitting in a play-in spot, as well as still being over the tax, so I think that they could potentially still try to make another significant trade. Now, the most realistic trade to get them out of the tax, if that's a priority for them, would be by moving Duncan Robinson's $18.2 million salary. A trade that would get them pretty close is moving Duncan Robinson's $18.2 million salary to Brooklyn in exchange for Royce O'Neal's $9.5 million expiring contract. And Brooklyn will be able to make this lopsided trade work because they have a $19.9 million trade exception from the Joe Harris trade. This trade would put Miami just $60,000 over the tax, so they still would have to make one additional move, but any minor move would get them under that tax line. Now, this trade would actually end up putting Brooklyn over the tax by around $600,000, but Brooklyn is likely to be sellers at the trade deadline, so I'd imagine that there could be other moves for them, like moving Spencer Dinwiddie, Dorian Finney-Smith, or even Nick Claxton that would get them away from that tax line. Now, there is one more playoff team that people may think may try to cut some salary to save money, but it probably won't be the case. and that's the Los Angeles Clippers. You see, the Clippers are also a repeater tax team that's sitting $34.7 million over the tax and are looking at a projected tax bill of $142 million. But I don't think that's going to be a concern for them because the Clippers are not just owned by the richest owner in the NBA, they're owned by the 10th richest man in the entire world, Steve Ballmer, whose net worth is just below $120 billion. Steve Ballmer's net worth is so much higher than the other owners that if you took the net worth of the next 10 richest NBA owners and added them up, they still wouldn't even be within $20 billion of Steve Ballmer. So after 4 disappointing seasons, with the Clippers finally healthy and rolling in a way that they never have before, I'm expecting this team to stay aggressive at the trade deadline despite looking at a projected tax bill of over $140 million. Now, looking forward to next season and beyond, the Clippers will definitely have to think about making decisions to reduce their payroll. Not necessarily to reduce their tax bill, but to avoid the restrictions that come with being an over-the-apron team, which is a big reason why we saw the Clippers recently sign Kawhi Leonard to a below-max salary extension. They're setting themselves up in a way where they can eventually find themselves under that apron, so they can keep building and adding to this roster without having to overcome massive obstacles, which they'll face if they continue to operate over the apron. Now, as for our other tax teams, it looks like they've pretty much come to terms with their fate. Phoenix, Milwaukee, Boston, and Denver are all around $10 to $20 million over the tax, and there's no real easy way for these teams to get under the tax, so that won't really be a priority of theirs as we approach the trade deadline.